Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Twomey, and I'm here with my amazing sister and co-host, Rachel Smith.
Hey guys.
We are on a mission to encourage and inspire others as they're navigating through this life and with your relationship with Christ. Today, we are going to be continuing a conversation that was started a few weeks back on one of our episodes with Carrie Flanagan. We mentioned the word Pharmakeia as referenced in the Bible and its modern day correlation that we refer to today as pharmacy or pharmacist. We really felt like this topic needed a little more context, discussion, exploration. And I think Rachel and I can both agree that we don't really know anything and that we're sharing our own interpretation and even our own personal opinions. So please take today's episode with a grain of salt. This is just a discussion, but we like to discuss, we like to debate, and we like to research. So we thought this would be an interesting topic to dive into. I also want to put a disclaimer that I should probably put this on every episode. We are not and never giving any medical advice. So anything medical related in this episode is purely conversational.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, nobody needs to come for us. These are our opinions. We have a right to our opinions.
And maybe we don't even know what our opinions are. No, I'm just kidding. We have some kind of pre-built opinions, I would say, based on our experience with things and our research. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit with some of this and from some research and kind of what we've discovered about this word and the context of this word. But it's fascinating. And I know you and I are both interested by it. And we figured, it was kind of mentioned in passing in that one episode. And this is really its own topic.
Yeah.
So, so let's get into a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The Greek word pharmakeia, which I'm pronouncing it that way because I'm an American living in the United States of America, but I doubt the Greeks pronounce it that way. It appears in Galatians 5:20 and in Revelation 18:23. Terms from the same root word appear in Revelation 9:21, Revelation 21:8, and Revelation 22:15. These are typically translated into the English language as sorcery, witchcraft, or sorcerer. Ancient Greek uses of pharmakeia closely mirror the generic modern English word drugs. The same Greek root word produced English terms such as pharmacy and pharmacist. Of course, when we think of the word sorcery today, we're thinking of witchcraft and spells and hocus pocus and supernatural powers and supernatural shows on TV and stuff like that. And I know, Rachel, you have some notes about this idea of sorcery from a biblical context.
Yeah. So a few things that from my research is, and I'm going to read this from this website directly. It's from Online Etymology Dictionary.
Yes, which is where we got a lot of our research from.
Yeah. One thing that I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit is like why we use the word pharmacy in our English language. And a lot of there's a whole topic in and of itself is where all of our words come from in English. We can see for sure that a lot of our words come from the Greek and also the Latin.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wanted to look into why we use this word in science and medicine.
It's very interesting to me that the word pharmakeia in Greek was akin to sorcery.
Right.
And that it was chosen to be used in terms of pharmacy and in terms of drugs. And so I think that's what we were interested in is where did this shift happen? And is there a correlation between the idea of a spell or sorcery and drugs?
Right. Yes. So from the Etymology Dictionary online is similar to what you read is pharmakeia is a preparer of drugs, a poisoner, a sorcerer. It's from pharmakon, a drug, a poison, philter, charm, spell, enchantment. Beacus, that's I don't know who that is, but there's someone they're referencing, writes that the original meaning cannot be clearly established and the word is clearly pre-Greek. The PH was restored in 16th century in French and 17th century in English. Buck notes that words for poison, apart from an inherited group, are in some cases the same as those for drug. In addition to the Greek word, he has Latin venenum, poison, earlier drug, medical potion, meaning the use or administration of drugs is from about the year 1400. The sense of art or practice of preparing, preserving, and compounding medicines and dispensing them according to prescriptions is from the 1650s. That of place where drugs are prepared and dispensed is recorded by 1833. So we're looking at something that we've been using for the past several hundred years, but this is suggesting that the use of pharmakeia was even pre-Greek. So that kind of brings me to some of the other interesting sides of this topic that I don't think a lot of people maybe know or even think about. I know that I didn't until I started digging in a little bit more to the book of Enoch. And we're mostly going to be talking about this from a scriptural basis today. And we're going to talk more about the scriptures that this word or root word of pharmakeia is used in. And so to reiterate, the book of Enoch is not in scripture. It's what's called an apocryphal book. We've talked about that in past episodes when we discussed Genesis 6 and the Nephilim. I believe that it is at least the first book of Enoch, because there's technically 3. I believe that the first is a good companion of Genesis. It's kind of painting another more of the picture of the same story that Genesis is telling us. And in our previous episodes we've done, now it's been a few months, on the Nephilim, I talked about from, in Genesis 6, it talks about how the sons of God fell from heaven and they took human women as their wives, and they're, procreated, and their offspring were what is called the Nephilim, or giants. That's where this concept that's all over the Old Testament comes from. Well, in the book of Enoch, those sons of God or fallen angels are called watchers. And I know I read from Enoch 6 and 7, I believe, or maybe it was just 6 in that episode. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend going back.
That's
and
what I was
listening
just going to say is if
Yeah.
you haven't listened to that before listening to this, that's okay, but definitely go back and listen. It starts in episode 3, but really the meat of it is in episode 4 and then again in 5.
Right. Yes. Because it'll be just a lot more detail. Like, what the heck are you even talking about right now? Like, why are you even?
Yeah, because
reading
you
from the
give
book
tons of
Enoch?
context. Those are
Yeah.
actually our most listened to episodes. So if you're listening now and you haven't heard it, you're going to want to, because it's very fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And it's pretty different from the stuff we've been talking about the past few months. So,
Definitely
so,
a deep dive.
So I'm just going to read a short few sentences from Enoch, first book of Enoch, chapter 7, because I think it will just kind of add a layer to this conversation on pharmakeia. So, so this is coming right off of 6, when the watchers fell, and it has just the end of chapter 6 names them all. I think there was 22 or something like that. So, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. I don't know what that is. So it kind of goes
Sounds tall.
on. Yeah. It goes on more in how they defiled the flesh of other animals on the earth, like birds and beasts, and how they turned against men and started devouring man. And then farther in down in later chapters, it talks about, to just give a summary, that the watchers not only taught the humans that what I just read, charms, enchantments, and the cutting of roots, but they also taught them other technology like metallurgy, weapon making, and about war. And so I have read some scholars talking about this part of Enoch that essentially, let's kind of create a picture in our mind. These divine beings, because this is what was then all of the pagan nation worshiped as their little g gods. Every religion that had, polytheism of all their various pantheon of gods, what they were referring to were these watchers, and there were hundreds of them. And that, you can kind of think in your mind like the Greeks and the Romans. They're kind of an easy one, that they had, what was Cupid, the god of love. They had the god of war. I think that's Apollo, which Apollo is also mentioned many times in the Bible, including the book of Revelation. They had the god of fertility and all these different gods. And essentially, if we think about things from the biblical perspective, we know and understand that there is only one God. There's only one creator, the one true Almighty, which is Yahweh. But when these angels fell, part of their hubris, which started with Satan, is because he wanted to be like God, and he cannot, and neither could any of these beings. And so they rebelled against God and came to earth, and their goal instead was to get humans to worship them instead of the one true God. And this is what we see all over the Bible, is idolatry.
Yeah.
And this is where demons stem from. This is one of the greatest, it is one of the greatest sins defined in the Bible and even talked about in the New Testament, that these watchers defiled themselves with humans. So to go back to that picture that I wanted to paint, is imagine being one of these humans, thousands and thousands of years ago, and these very powerful beings just walk up, a big crowd of them show up, and they have technology, and they're beautiful. They're not ugly, monstrous creatures. They are like us humans, but more. They're more beautiful. They're more powerful, and they have technology that humans of the time did not have. And they strike up a deal that if you trade your daughters with us, we will give you weapons. We will give you what I just read as defined, charms and spells, and showing them the cutting of roots and trees. So what some scholars have deduced from what that means is this is where magic, sorcery, medicine comes from. This is the genesis of that in human history. So it existed before,
Mhm.
but it was the watchers, it was the fallen angels who taught this to human when they intermingled and then went on
Mhm.
to commit even more atrocious sins against creator Yahweh.
Mhm.
And this
Mhm.
was terrible in his sight.
Mhm.
And this then led to him flooding the earth to start over again with genetically pure humans. But the watchers are in chains under the earth now, but the disembodied spirits of their children, the Nephilim, still have access to us in the spiritual realm. And that's,
Mhm.
a little bit of what we get into on that episode 3 and 4 that we
Yeah.
mentioned. So I
Definitely
just,
listen to those episodes because I know that this can seem almost overwhelming because this isn't the
yeah,
kind of stuff that we talk about at church on Sunday,
yeah,
and we talk about that a little bit in some of our previous episodes, that sometimes service can be kind of soft at a lot of churches, or what we kind of refer to as cotton candy, that, they're, and in many ways it has to be. Because if you were to expect new people that have never heard the word of God before to come into church, and then you're talking about all this wild stuff, you know, it gets away from the message of Christ. And that's why a lot of Christians, I think, don't want to go there, because they're like, well, we just got to just focus on Jesus. But the Bible as a whole was given to us for a reason. And that's to really explore it and understand and learn from it. And I find it interesting that, I didn't know any of this stuff until I was in my 30s. And I was raised in the church. We were both raised in the church, and it wasn't something that is always talked about. So if this is new, you're listening and you've never heard this stuff before, and you're like, what are you guys talking about? It's in the Bible, read it. Now, obviously, the book of Enoch is a companion to,
yeah,
but it details a little bit more of some of the references, like she said in Genesis, and then also again in Revelation, some of what we see. So it is very fascinating that the watchers are the background for teaching charms and spells. Of course, I latched on a little bit to the cutting of roots and trees,
mm-hmm.
because to me, I almost think of it this way. It was like humans hadn't figured it out yet. Actually, Mike and I were talking about this in the car today, about just how a lot of times people worship creation and not the creator.
Yeah, which is
And
witchcraft.
he clearly created such an amazing world and system. I forget what he used to say. There was a Christian scientist, Kent Hovind, back in the day, who used to say, you really think that the world came from a swirling bowl of goop or soup or whatever. And when you really think about how our ecosystems work, that would be impossible for it to come from a swirling bowl of nothing,
Yeah.
because everything works together. And the way I kind of see this roots conversation is almost like humans were on this planet and they figured out a bunch of stuff, but they didn't know everything. And these angels, they were side by side with God and in heaven, and they're like, man, that's cool. God created red raspberry leaf and it can tone a woman's uterus. I'm just going to use that as an example. Or, this herb can do this, or fennel seeds can take your stomach ache away. And they knew this because they saw God's creation from a different perspective. And it's almost like they went to earth and they're like, I know something you don't know,
Yeah.
and I'm going to tell you what it is. But then those same things can also be used for ill,
Yes. Like,
poisonous
right.
berries, for example. Now, I'm sure a lot of people had figured out what was poisonous by then, because, humans will eat and animals will eat almost anything. And I'm sure
Yeah.
a lot of people figured it out and passed that on. But perhaps there were a lot of things that still had not been figured out at this point. And I kind of almost see it as the watchers being like, I know something you don't know, and I'll trade this knowledge and I'll teach you this. And I just think that things can be used for good and they can be used for bad.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when it comes to herbs. Herbs can be used for good to heal our bodies. But now let's take this back to this correlation between pharmakeia and pharmacy. I think that a lot of people, I'm sure in the early days of medicine creation, like I think about penicillin and when penicillin was first invented, so to speak, or they first figured it out that it could help with bacteria, with infection. And there definitely, I'm sure, wasn't an ill intention there. I'm sure there's a lot of good intention when it comes to figuring out how to heal the body. But I don't know at which point it became, I'm going to control the bodies that God has created, that I can fix it. I
Yeah.
can solve it. It's almost like we talked with Dr. Stu about cause and effect. And it kind of reminded me of, do you remember that movie Final Destination?
Oh, yes. I think about that movie all the time.
I don't know if
Scarred me for life.
I hate scary movies. And so I don't even know if I even finished that movie. But for those that haven't watched it, and I don't even know if this is the right synopsis, but the way I remember it is everyone in the movie had like a fate that they were going to die, but some
Mhm.
people would dodge it, but then they would end up dying anyway, and just in a different way because
Very
everyone,
graphic, violent ways.
yeah, just violent ways. Don't watch this movie.
No, it's terrible.
Don't. I'm not recommending it.
It's what nightmares are made of.
It is. Don't watch it. But that's kind of the same thing in my mind with this idea that we can create medical solutions to solve human problems. And it's like, all right, we're going to create a birth control pill that will stop a woman from getting pregnant. Great. We've solved the problem. You're not going to get pregnant, except you're going to get cancer from this pill that you took to not
Yeah.
get pregnant, or you're going to get ovarian cysts that are going to explode inside of your body, or you're going to get acne, or you're going to become infertile permanently. And it's a cause and effect that I see happening. And that's where I question the difference between it and sorcery. Now, let me just put out there, I'm talking. That's all. I'm just talking. This is not, I'm not condemning anything that any person takes. But I, like Dr. Stu said last week, his whole thing is about informed consent.
Yeah.
And that's mine too, is know what you're taking and why you're taking it and the cause and effect, and question whether or not it's worth it for you in your situation. And I don't know anyone else's situation, so I can't speak to anyone's scenarios, and I won't because I'm not a doctor. But it's the kind of thing that I think we are programmed as a society to be so comfortable with drugs and pharmaceuticals that we don't question it because it's not something that you do. Your doctor prescribes you a medicine for, let's say it's high blood pressure, and you take it. And you don't know the cause and effect that that's going to have on you. You don't know that that could make you at a higher risk for having a stroke. And you think, well, does it matter? But I think that this is where we just all need to do our research and question, what are we trying to get out of this? Like,
Right.
nobody gets out of this life alive. All of
Yeah.
us are going to pass. All of us are going to perish. Are we just trying to save ourselves for an infinite amount of time? And my perspective on a lot of medicine has changed dramatically over the last couple of years, to where, I wouldn't go to a hospital unless it was like dire emergency scenario. But even then, I have a hard time because now I have a hard time with the idea of blood
Mhm.
and that type of thing. Like, I'm not feeling good about my life force. The life of the body is in the blood.
Yeah.
That's in the Bible, about it even being drawn, let alone me putting someone else's blood inside my body. I've done it before. I've
Yeah.
donated blood. But right now in my life, it's something I'm questioning. And I've had a couple of people that, are close friends and family that are like, well, what would you do if you got cancer? I'm like, first of all, I would never know I had cancer because I wouldn't get any of the screening done to know if I have it. But second of all, 50% of people get cancer. Everybody gets cancer. And I know that what radiation does to people. Do I want to then sacrifice certain pieces of my humanity to go through that process? Personally, no. If someone else wants to get radiation, by all means, I would never, my goal here is not to say like, don't do these things. It's
Yeah.
to question it and to question it for yourself. And so these are
Right.
things that are going through my head is like, if I was to get into that scenario, I would really have to sit with the Lord and be like, is this your will for my life? I will eat of your garden. I will eat as well as I can eat to try to heal my cells of these cancerous cells. But is going into pharmacy what I want to do to get there?
Mhm.
Anyway, I've been talking a lot. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, lots of thoughts with that.
I'm
Lots
all
of
over the
thoughts.
place today.
I agree with you that it's a matter of an individual's choice, but I think kind of our main core of our point behind even talking about this and what we have learned in the past few years is that you can never truly have informed consent about anything if you don't know what it is that you're putting in your body.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's part of what seems deceptive about the pharmaceutical industry of today
Mhm.
is that there's not a whole lot of informing going on.
Mhm.
That it, I think, cancer is a pretty big extreme, but
Absolutely.
I think that example is used because a lot of people equate having cancer to, oh, it's life or death
Yes,
unless
exactly.
I
They're like,
act on
well,
this.
wait, you could die. You're not going to treat it. And I think my mentality is if I were to get a life threatening type of cancer, my our uncle passed of stage 4 lung cancer. And he didn't know he had it until it was way too late. And it was horrible. But at the same time, like, would he have chosen to go through chemotherapy? I don't know. And if he would have, I would have supported him because he's my uncle. But
Right.
if he also would have said, you know what, I'm going to clean up my diet, I'm going to pray. And if this is the Lord's will for me, then it's the Lord's will for me. I think that's kind of the place that I feel like I'm entering. I guess I shouldn't say there's any absolutes, but it's hard to say because, this is like what's that game? Like, would you rather, because anybody could be like, well, if you found out tomorrow that you had this type of cancer and you have little kids at home, you might make a different choice. Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't know, but we're also
Yeah.
not promised tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also this is even if we're going to do the would you rather game, this is even more difficult one is what if your kid was sick?
Yeah.
Because
What if
it's
your kid
one
was
thing
sick?
to make it's one thing as a sovereign being over our own body to make a decision on our own health and our own future, and
Mhm.
whether that's going through something very painful or dying. But
Mhm.
it's another thing as a parent to make that decision for someone that you love more than yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's where these decisions can be impossibly difficult. And none of us know for sure what we would do unless we were in that situation.
Well, this is exactly why faith and our relationship with Yahweh is so pivotal and so
Right.
important because if you're good with God and you are in a good place from that perspective, I think you don't have that same fear over death. I think there's a lot of fear about dying and
Mhm.
wanting to live longer when it's like if you know the joys of what is waiting for us, you don't have that fear in many ways, you know?
Yeah, and I think that that's a difference in the Christian perspective. I think that's what really rocked the world when in the first century, Christians were being martyred left and right, literally being thrown into lions' dens at the Colosseum, and their children being murdered in front of them. And this kind of stuff is still happening today to Christians in certain areas of the world.
Yeah.
And it's because the message behind the gospel, which is what Christians stand on, is that this life is not it for us. It's an eternity with our Savior. That is our truest life. That's what we're getting towards. And in the past several centuries, Christianity has, especially in the Western world, has become practically a caricature of the past. It's become just as worldly as the rest of the world. It's about comforts of our everyday and pleasures. And the more comfortable and pleasurable you are in your life experience right now, the tighter you hold on to this.
Yeah.
These people in other parts of the world who are practicing the truest form of Christianity that there is, they're not holding on tightly to this life. They are ready to let go. And I'm not like trying to like lecture us all to feel bad for being born in, modern
times. Yeah.
times. It's really just looking at the Bible. We look at what people have experienced and we look at what scripture says, and either we believe this, what it's saying to us, or we don't. And what the Bible says is that this life is a vapor. It says that all throughout the scripture, both Old and New Testaments, that this life is but a vapor. And Yeshua said himself to how does he phrase it? To die is to live. That when you die, you crucify your flesh, your desires, your pleasures, and you live for him. That is truly living. So this is kind of a tangent we've gone on here on this topic, talking more about pharmaceuticals. So to kind of try to tie it all back in together, is there is a wide range, obviously, on pharmaceuticals and how they affect our lives positively or negatively. You kind of brought up what I would say is probably the most extreme example of cancer treatments that's in the pharmaceutical world, but there's probably thousands and thousands more pharmaceuticals that are for just daily
stuff. Yeah.
Right. To just
to
better
live
your life.
Yeah.
Right. Like birth control is an example of one of them, of someone who doesn't want to get pregnant and they don't know any other way. And we have
let's sidebar this for 1 second, because we could also group that into sorcery. At least I'm going to. This is my opinion coming out right now. I want to group birth control pills into sorcery, because there is a natural way to track your fertility. There is a natural way to not get pregnant without having to take a drug. And that is what the world doesn't tell you. And this is my personal opinion on this. So please, bear with a grain of salt. I truly believe that birth control is from the enemy. And it is a tool used to destroy women and their fertility and their future and the relationship between a man and a woman, because it changes even the scent of the other person.
Yeah.
If you listen to our previous episodes on fertility and birth, you'll hear us talk about fertility awareness method is a method you could use. It has many facets. You could take your basal body temperature. There are other things I'm not going to explain on this, but so look into it, fertility awareness method. But there are things that women could have done 1,000 years ago to prevent getting pregnant, because guess what? You can only get pregnant a couple days out of the month when you're actually ovulating, but nobody talks about this. I shouldn't say
Right.
nobody. A lot of people don't talk about this because it's easier to take a pill. And that's where I think we have gotten so off track as a society that is our normal, is take the pill. Take the pill for everything instead of, how did God design these bodies? He is a genius. He created our bodies on a clock, on a natural clock. And if we tune in to how he created that body, we don't need the drug.
Right.
We can avoid getting pregnant if we want to avoid getting pregnant or need to for whatever reason.
Right. Because if you think about it, what is the drug doing? The drug is preventing you from ovulating. It is manipulating your hormones and the natural processes of your body to prevent an egg from being released and fertilized, or to be fertilized. And that is going against the way our bodies were created to
Yeah.
work.
Yes.
And there's
It's
going to
disrupting your
be,
system.
right. So to tie this into sorcery, there's going to be
An effect.
an effect of that. Right.
Cause and effect.
Yes. So, and so it's like, well, what, just to keep playing on this one specific drug, because there's, like I said, thousands more that are literally just about making our lives easier, more convenient, more pleasurable, is why does birth control have to exist? The hormonal, like for the pill, so that we can have consequenceless sex, so that we can do an act that was meant for procreation without consequences, so that we can, what we've been sold, this lie we've been sold for the past 50 years, is that this is liberating women, that we can be free and do whatever we want with our bodies, with whoever we want. And this is all just pulling away. So I'm really saying all this to kind of back up what you're saying, that you believe, and I agree with you, that hormonal birth control is from the enemy, because it's interfering with how women's bodies were designed to work, which then creates a cause and effect for her health, but also a cause and effect for her decisions
And mental health.
Right, her mental health too.
And you're sold a lie because you think that you're living this consequence-free scenario. But we talked about this in a previous episode too, that it returns to us. I mean, there is no consequence-free liberation. You might think that you're having that in the moment or during that period in your or stage in your life, but
right, yeah. And so, I think it was for thousands of years, women, including women in marriage, would just keep getting pregnant and pregnant and pregnant and having more and more and more babies. In modern times, people are like, well, I don't want that for my life. Like, even if they are only having children in marriage, God's design for us as humans was to be fruitful and multiply. This is just what the scripture says. Like, it says what it says, and we can't make it mean what we want it to
love
mean.
to make our own interpretations and then like twist it around to mean whatever we want it to mean.
Right. And it doesn't, like, maybe we don't want to have 15 kids, but our point is you cannot have 15 children without chemically altering your body. That's a modern invention. And it was invented under this guise of women's liberation, and that it was so dangerous for women to be having babies, and it was so scary to continue to get pregnant, when all comes down to being educated, to being informed. If you are informed on how your body works, and informed on natural processes, and informed on nature and how our bodies respond to natural elements from the earth, like minerals and vitamins, and to truly live healthy lives the way that God designed, we don't have to be getting pregnant every single cycle. There's God's design, and then there is how the enemy has perverted God's design, and how it's not always just Satan. It is also our human nature to do what benefits us today in our flesh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to kind of move on from this, that
Yeah.
you know,
Let's circle it back to the word pharmakeia again, because there was something that I skipped over in our notes. And that is really that a lot of people, I actually found this very fascinating when I was doing research about the term or the word pharmakeia. On Bible Gateway, they said the term sorcery increased by 193% as a
wow.
search term in 2021 when compared to 2020 due to questions over the new darts that came out. And people wanted to know what the Bible said. They want to know what the Bible says about pharmaceuticals. They wanted to know, is this, oh, I don't know, I guess I could probably say mRNA and not get censored. I don't know.
Well, because it's not a typical jab. It's a gene therapy drug.
Yes.
It
And
is
it's, and
it's
even if it
altering our
was,
disease in
but
some way.
let's just slow down here, because even if it was a typical one, have
Yeah.
we stopped to question the typical ones? Do we
Right.
really think that God's design is that poor that we need to invent all this stuff to keep us
Yeah.
alive?
That our
Are we
survival
that
is
weak of a civilization that we would not survive without men and women making cocktails to shoot into our bloodstreams?
right. Yeah,
And that's my question, you
because
know?
actually God created something way more complicated and designed better, and that is our immune systems. And what compromises our immune systems is our environment. That includes our diet and our water and our air and every single aspect of this modern
Yes.
technological world we are living in is compromising these immune systems that God created in us as a fail safe.
And
And
these injections. And it's like, think
right,
about how many people have autoimmune disorders. You
right.
know all too well about this.
Yeah, I do.
How many
Yeah.
people have autoimmune disorders? Where did that come from? You know, it didn't just like come out of thin air.
Yeah. Yeah. And so yeah, it's very interesting to me that people are wondering about this more because of this very popular jab that has come out on the market, and
It's
there's
good that
consequences.
it's good that people are questioning it. I wish that they would have sooner,
Yeah.
but there was just so much propaganda on the media, you know, back and forth, that I think people just got too overwhelmed
Oh,
by what was going on.
speaking of propaganda, this is something I wanted to mention on this topic. Did you know that the United States and New Zealand are the only countries that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise to the public?
Yeah.
I've heard people say, like people from the UK or somewhere like that, that they are visiting America and they see drug commercials for like a prescription drug on the TV, and they're like, "What is this?" Because they've never seen anything like that, because our government allows drug companies to advertise it on commercials and ads,
It's
and
worse
now,
than just allows, though. It's worse than allows.
well,
They're
they're
getting
funded.
paid. They're
Yeah,
funded. Our government is funded
it's
by these
funded by the
companies.
pharmaceutical companies. Yes.
It should read US government sponsored by. You
And
know, I
that's
mean, look
it's
at a magazine. If you picked up any magazine from, you know, like a People magazine to a home gardening magazine, Homes and Better Homes and Gardens, it's like every third page is a pharmaceutical ad.
yeah, for
Look
Botox
for it. Next time
or
you open a magazine, look for it. It'll make you sick.
and now it's also seeping into social media. I've noticed that literally celebrities like Martha Stewart
Mm-hmm.
are being funded by certain drug companies like
Yep.
Pfizer to they're putting out their own promotion on their social media pages to go and get a certain booster. And it's so
Yeah.
manipulative
It
because
is.
then you think of like all the people who adore Martha Stewart, which is interesting in and of itself to me. She's a criminal. But not to hate on her. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying,
Don't
but
go after Martha, man.
if someone is her fan and they trust her and
Yeah.
she's promoting a drug, a
But this is how
medication,
they all are. That's how they
and
all are.
that
And that's the thing is
but
that
there's
we,
no informing going on of
yeah,
what actually is being put into people's bodies. And
yeah,
that's what people need to research is and
yeah.
you're not truly giving informed consent just because you saw a commercial and that everybody is doing it and says that it's fine. That's not informed consent.
Question everything. That's what Rachel and I would say. Question everything. I'll give another example that isn't even about directly pharmaceuticals. Well, first, you mentioned Martha Stewart, but other influencers that aren't technically celebrities that are just social media influencers, they were paid to do the same things. Companies reached out to them and said, I'll pay you, $2,000 to say this. And
Yeah.
people will do it because people want to get paid. But one of the things, and this is not paid, this is an example of social programming, which is also another thing that has happened, is an influencer will say, do this, and then the news will come out with all this and then people follow along with it because that's how people are programmed to think, is to follow the crowd and
Like
follow what the
wearing
crowd
masks.
says. Now, my example is how many people get induced because induction
Mm.
is a thing. I was talking about this with a group of women that are not getting induced. We're like the hippie, like, wait until your baby's ready type of folks.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how many influencers are like, I'm getting induced on Monday, or I'm getting induced, next week or whatever. They don't know any better. It's not that
Yeah.
they're saying it because they're trying to influence people to get induced. They're doing it because they themselves don't know that what getting induced really could mean with the cascade of interventions with birth. And so I think that there's a lot of social programming that's going on with all of this. I mean, think about it, Ray. We grew up from the time we were little kids watching pharmaceutical commercials.
Yeah.
We're how old? 4 years old, 5 years old, commercial comes on. Do 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 do. And we're just so used to this being part of our culture that we don't necessarily think about it. And then you go to the doctor. Gosh, I know this because my 3-year-old is watching kids TV shows now. And on these little kid TV shows are like, I have to go to the doctor for this. And it's like, why is this kid going to the doctor? Because they have a cough? It starts very, very young. Anyway, I'm getting on a tangent.
Yeah. I mean, programming only works when you've been programmed to birth. So it makes our minds more impressionable even as adults too. So
Yeah. All right. I know we're going off in a lot of directions here. There's a lot we could talk about with this. And I know we've actually had a request to talk about low tox living and things like that, because it's not just about pharmaceuticals. This isn't Rachel and I aren't going to go after just that. We're going to go after everything. Our water is poison, our food, our skincare, like the
life
mattress
is way
that we
more
sleep on, our
stressful than
clothes, living is toxic.
yeah. Yeah.
But we'll talk about that in a future episode. I think that the big thing here is in our episode with Carrie, I mentioned it there and I want to say it again here, that I am not saying to stop taking every pharmaceutical that you're taking. I'm not trying to give you medical advice. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. Don't listen to me anyway. The reason that I really think Rachel and I wanted to have this conversation is honestly just to encourage you to think. That's it. Like, just think about it. and ask why, and ask, what is the history of this particular thing that I'm taking? Who created it and why? And what is it made out of? Because there's a big difference between taking an herb, like eating it, consuming it, and then them taking the idea of the herb, the chemical compounds of it, and then making it in a lab with other ingredients and putting formaldehyde in it. There's a big difference between that. So this is just to question what it is that you're eating, you're drinking, you're swallowing, the skincare products that you use. We're going to go there later, but
Yeah.
your skin is the largest organ in your body. And when you're slathering this junk on that you don't know what it is, that's a whole other conversation. And it just, I know it can feel overwhelming, but we have to start somewhere, and explore and dive into these topics for yourself is really what I want to say. Do your own research, your own. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to the media. Don't listen to your friends, to your mom, to your sister. Like, do the research and then pray about it. Pray that the
Absolutely.
Lord will reveal the right path for you, because it is so easy to get on the wrong path because of another person and the fear of losing people and friends. Because I'll tell you, a lot of people think I'm insane now. Like, I've lost a lot of friends, and so have you. You're laughing because you have too. But
Yeah.
Rachel and I are basically freaks now, which is fine. I would rather be a freak than poison myself. And that's okay. But I know Rachel and I, this journey for us has meant that the Lord taught us more about food and how some foods can heal and others cause disease. It taught us that plants like dandelion root aren't actually an enemy that you should spray with Roundup. That's also going to give you cancer, but they actually serve an incredible purpose in nature when they're consumed by humans.
Yeah.
It taught us about how incredible our bodies are, that God created these bodies and he created them to heal. So really, as we wrap up today and finish, just ponder on the products you're using, or things that you've used in the past that have been recalled or have come up in the news as being toxic or a carcinogen due to new discoveries like sunscreen, hint, hint,
Yeah.
wink, wink, or this idea of acetaminophen. A lot of people are talking about Tylenol right now and saying, oh, there's a Tylenol shortage. I need Tylenol. Don't worry about the Tylenol shortage. That's a distraction, sis. Go look into the class action lawsuits against Tylenol and it being linked to ADHD and ADD in children and other problems.
Yeah.
Because the shortage is a distraction from what's really going on. And that's that this Tylenol is poisoning us. But
Absolutely.
anyhow,
Yeah.
and if you're thinking like, okay, well, what do I do if I have a headache and I don't feel good? Remember what Paula Carper said when she joined us for an episode. Those are symptoms of a problem. Focus on getting to the root cause of your problem, not covering up or masking your problem with a drug that's only blocking the signals in your brain to your body.
Right. Absolutely.
And how it functions. So if you have frequent headaches or migraines, or your child has a fever, something is going on. Perhaps that body needs to have the fever in order to heal itself. Or
Right.
perhaps you're getting headaches because you're exposed to something toxic.
Right.
This is the time to talk to a dietitian or a holistic doctor and question the other stuff.
Right. Absolutely.
And tangent.
Yeah. Well, that kind of ends the episode, not just the tangent.
Anything that you want to add in there, Rachel?
Not really. I think that's kind of we just really wanted to give a kind of very brief summary. I mean, I know we've been talking for almost an hour now, but we
Brief
obviously can't.
hour-long summary.
Right. But it really is, because if we could go into tangents on every single aspect of not just the pharmaceutical industry, but the food and, skincare and household products, which we want to do episodes on eventually. So this is kind of just giving a little food for thought on this biblical concept of pharmakeia being related to sorcery, and hopefully just kind of get some people's wheels turning on what sorcery looks like today.
Yeah.
And again, this is our opinions and our perspectives, and no, we're not saying that it's all evil and being used for evil. A lot of it is. We're saying that, but we are just advocates for, like we keep reiterating, informed consent and making a decision for yourselves and your families that you feel confident in, that
Mhm.
align with your convictions, because that's what
Yes.
it came down to for me when I started just alone talking about the pharmaceutical industry. When I started researching what was in things that I was
Mm.
putting in my body or giving to my children, I had a real come to Jesus moment that I was feeling convictions that weren't aligning with my actions.
Mhm.
And so that's what we have to, like you said, go to the Lord about and pray about
Mhm.
and come to peace with.
Yeah.
Because I know just talking about certain things that are injected into my body that I decided to not do anymore,
Mhm.
which I didn't even get into how those things have damaged my body for life. And I have severe reactions from childhood of why I have health problems today.
Yeah.
But when I had that moment of, okay, if I never do that again, then am I going to regret it if I ever get such and such illness?
Mhm.
And that's the moment that I brought it to the Lord and really had to decide, I'm going to trust you with my body. I'm going to trust you with my health. And I'm not going to fear a disease that there's supposedly a solution to prevent that disease.
Yeah.
I'm going to trust the way that you've created me and honoring and nourishing this body so that I can be strong enough to never suffer from something like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just my own closing of this topic, that we are definitely the freaks in our friend groups and even our family sometimes
Yep.
with our opinions. But this is our podcast and we have it so we can share our opinions for other people who, because honestly, having opinions like this, it can feel very isolating at times. There's times I've felt crazy, especially in the past 2, now going on 3 years, that like the world is going mad and it just, like, I feel like the one who's going the maddest. And it's actually been great. Then you and I share very similar opinions on at least just this stuff, to
Mhm.
have someone to kind of go through it with,
Yeah.
because not being a part of the mainstream thought it can just be very lonely. So that's kind of why we want to share about on our podcast, because if you listen to this and you think everything we say is crazy and just a load of rubbish, like, that's totally fine. That's your right to have that opinion. But if you're listening to this and it actually is making sense to you and it makes you feel less alone, that's part of my goal and talking
Yeah.
about my worthless opinions.
Yeah, I know. We've been waking up is what we
Yeah.
say. You know, we've been like waking up to a bunch of things and it's can be hard to wake up. It can be scary because it's isolating. And when you're like, "Oh my gosh, have you read this insert? Do you see what it says?"
Mhm.
And other people are like, "Who cares? Every insert is like that." And you're like, "Oh my gosh, but that's not normal."
Yeah.
But that's just you're waking up to separating yourself from this like social programming that we're under. It can be hard, and it can be hard when your friends don't understand you or your family or people around you. But like Rachel said, if you're questioning things, glad you're here. You're not alone. Question everything. And even if
Yeah.
you're not there yet,
We'll give
I'll
you
be
more
praying
things.
for you.
We'll praying for you, and we'll give you more things to question.
Yeah.
But
Stay tuned.
but let me just end on this note then. The one thing that we can stand firm on is the creator, is Yahweh, and that he sent his son Yeshua to save us from not only our own sins, but this sinful state of the world. And that is the truth and foundation of my life. And it's the only thing that I don't question, because I know it for reality.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Thank you, Ray. And thank you for tuning in and being on this journey with us. As always, if you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, you can join the mission on Instagram and Facebook at The Radiant Mission, or on YouTube. And Rachel, I'm going to let you, do you have your notes open today? I'd like you to read our closing verse.
Okay, it's Psalm 103, 2-3. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases. And we're wishing everyone a radiant week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.